just many lines of data together. We go back and forth across the reef, and then it begins to look like this. We get a picture of what the bottom looks like. The green part being the deeper parts, the red part being the shallower parts, so we can see how the bottom changes as we move along. And that's really important because fish, which I'm particularly interested in, really like this rough, bumpy bottom. So wherever the bottom comes up, you always find lots of fish there. So we like to see that. This is a really sophisticated sonar, and it actually measures the time that sound takes to go to the bottom and bounce back. And that depends on the density of the seawater. So we measure the density of the seawater using this system here. This is called a CTD. And we make corrections for the sound velocity using the density of the water data. So it has we get very fine scale depth measurements of the bottom. We also correct it for the tides and a lot of other things too. So.
Does the temperature matter, or is part of
the temperature does matter because it changes the density of the seawater. The warmer the water is, the less dense it is, and so the speed of sound changes. So it makes corrections in the speed of sound based on the salt content, the salinity, and the temperature. So we end up with nice pictures of the bottom that we can look at in a lot of different ways. So this is what this is the big picture, and then this is looking at it from a plane view, looking at along the bottom. You see the bottom rises up about 2 meters, 6 feet or so, and this is what it looks like in profile. So wherever the bottom comes up like that, that's where we like to find a lot of fish. That's where the fish like to hang out, is on that rough bottom. So we really want to find that kind of stuff. So it's really, this gives us a really nice kind of flyover view of what the bottom looks like and where the fish are. Most of the work we've been doing for the past couple of weeks has been at Gray's Reef National Marine Sanctuary. And this is what the sanctuary looks like. These are pictures from the bottom. This is right off the coast of Georgia, about 20 miles east of Sapelo Island. It's a really spectacular habitat with a lot of different kinds of fish. And the ship's sonar system can the sonar not only measures the bottom and the bottom topography, but it can actually see fish, because fish reflect sound as well. So we can actually see where the fish are in relation to the bottom. And then we dive on these sites to see what kind of fish. The sonar can't identify the fish, but it can just tell us where they are. So we dive on the sites to identify the kinds of fish and count them. Divers, with slates counting the fish, and correlate those numbers, the number of fish that the divers see, with the number of fish that we estimate using the sonar. But once we get that, we can really map a lot of bottom very quickly. You can move along at 5 or 10 miles an hour, going back and forth with the sonar, mapping the bottom and measuring fish without having to stop and do dives at every site. Once you correlate the number of fish you see in the dive with the sonar signals. The ship also has a flow-through seawater system that takes uncontaminated seawater, or, well, I guess most seawater is contaminated these days, but seawater that's not contaminated by the ship itself from the bow. So as the bow moves through the water, it takes seawater. And it comes through a series of instruments that are located up there that measure the temperature and the salinity and the fluorometry, which tells us what kind of pigments are in the water. And that tells us what kind of phytoplankton is in the water and how much phytoplankton is in the water. And the phytoplankton are the tiny plants that convert sunlight into energy. They're the whole food chain is based on that phytoplankton. So we can measure that really quickly too. So we can find areas that are really productive seawater. We'll move through here. Any questions about any of this?
How much time do you take typically for the sonar and the mapping for a diver to go into? So like over a half-an-hour period, you see what or 5-minute period, you see what the sonar is and what the divers are saying?
What we do is at night, when we can't dive, because it's dark and it's hard to see, we do the sonar surveys at night. Okay. So we do sonar surveys all night long, and the sonar techs are up all night finding places that look interesting, and then the next day we'll dive on those sites. And the divers are doing lots of other things besides that, but that is one of the things they do. So the sonar we can do that 24 hours a day, but at night we actually lay out a grid. And we can do it in here. We lay out lines in here, and that's transmitted up to the bridge, and who's ever up there driving will steer along those lines and map it as we go. And they get to see up there what we're mapping at the same time we see it here. And then the next day when we get up, when the divers get up, they look at what we've mapped, where the interesting bottom is, where the fish are, and we dive on those spots. So we're going to go through this door here. This is the wet lab.
In your head.
Step up.
Just scrunch everywhere you go in here. Especially you.
All crew.
On ships we have a different name for everything. So this isn't the floor, it's the deck. That's not the ceiling, it's the overhead. These are not walls, they're bulkheads, so there's a different name for everything.
Is it outfitted with the additional units?
So the wet lab, as the name implies, we can bring seawater here. You don't see a lot of fancy electronics, so everything that's in here can get wet. So this is where we base our scuba operation. So you see some scuba gear laid out. So we set up our dive plans in the morning in here, and then the divers go out on the small boats to the various dive sites that we picked out. The flow-through seawater system that's up on the bow that's measuring the clean seawater as it comes through actually comes into this lab here through this pipe and through this instrument over here that takes all the measurements. We can add other things to that instrument. It can measure carbon dioxide, it can measure the acidity of the ocean, it can measure hydrocarbons and other kinds of pollutants. And so this ship, when this ship goes to the Gulf of Mexico next week, it's going to be doing that kind of stuff down there. We can also fill scuba tanks in here. So we're when we're doing dive operations, we're self-contained. We don't have to go back in and get tanks filled. So this allows us to stay out here for a couple of weeks. It gives us a place to stay, small boats to dive from, and everything we need to help support the dive operations.
Do you have any details of the mission in the Gulf of Mexico to diving and?
I don't know what the details are. I think their primary mission is to measure water quality, and so they have the CTD that we have on board here. They have a bigger one that can actually take samples of water at depth, and then we have this system that takes water samples at the surface. And so they're going to be looking at surface and subsurface water samples. And then the fisheries acoustic system, the sonar system that counts and measures fish, can also detect oil, because oil is a different density than seawater. And so all that system does is look for different densities. And so it will be able to spot the subsurface oil as well. Right now we're very good at mapping it on the surface, but the subsurface oil is kind of a mystery. It's a different temperature, so it shows up when we measure temperatures. But I think this acoustic system on board will be able to map it acoustically, just like we're mapping the bottom, like we're mapping fish.
So it might be able to confirm the 3 universities that say there is a plume 400 feet below the surface.
Yeah.